In 1920, Rudolph Valentino bought a cursed ring and ignored the warning. 6 years later, he was gone. Since then, 10 more people have been destroyed by that same piece of jewelry, including a man shot by a gun that hadn't been fired in 20 years, a gambler who lasted exactly 7 days, and a museum curator who merely photographed it. This is the story of 11 impossible tragedies, and the dark question of whether the curse is still alive today. Rudolph Valentino, the Latin lover who bought his own fate. When Rudolph Valentino walked into that San Francisco jewelry shop in 1920, he was the most desired man in the world. 6 years later, he would be gone at 31, and many believed the silver ring with the semi-precious stone he purchased that day had sealed his destiny. You see, Valentino wasn't just a movie star. He was a phenomenon. Women fainted at his premieres. They wrote him thousands of letters each week, confessing their deepest longings. When he appeared on screen in films like The Sheik and Blood and Sand, something happened that had never quite happened before in cinema. An entire generation fell hopelessly, completely in love with the same man. The ladies called him the Great Lover. And he was. Dark eyes that seemed to look right through you. A dancer's grace. That mysterious quality that made every woman feel like she was the only one in the room. He'd come from Italy with practically nothing and transformed himself into Hollywood royalty. But here's where the story takes its dark turn. During a visit to San Francisco, Valentino wandered into a small jewelry shop. Among the bracelets and brooches, something caught his eye. A distinctive ring set with a tiger's eye stone. The stone itself seemed to follow you with its gaze, the way a cat watches a mouse. The band was cool to the touch, always cool, even in the warmth of a hand. The moment he saw it, he wanted it. There was something about it, something that drew him in. The shopkeeper, or perhaps it was a fortune teller who happened to be there, the stories vary, warned him. "That ring carries a curse," she said. "It will bring you nothing but misfortune." Valentino laughed. He was at the absolute peak of his fame, invincible, untouchable. What could possibly harm him? He bought the ring and slipped it onto his finger. The metal stayed cold against his skin. Almost immediately, those close to him noticed changes. Film historian David Sten later documented that Valentino's health, which had always been robust, began to falter shortly after the purchase. He grew tired more easily. There were mysterious pains, unexplained ailments. But Valentino kept working, kept wearing the ring, kept dismissing the warnings. In August of 1926, Rudolph Valentino collapsed in his hotel room in New York. What began as stomach pains quickly became something far more serious, a perforated ulcer, peritonitis setting in. The doctors did everything they could, but it wasn't enough. On August 23rd, Valentino's life came to its tragic close. He was just 31 years old. The ring was still on his finger, still cool to the touch. The world went into mourning like nothing Hollywood had ever seen. Over 100,000 people lined the streets of New York for his funeral. Riots broke out as crowds tried to get one last glimpse of their idol. Several women, overcome with grief, took their own lives in the days that followed. It was as though a light had gone out, and no one quite knew how to bear it. But the story of the ring didn't end there. As Valentino lay on his deathbed, the woman who loved him most, the tempestuous Polish actress Pola Negri, was by his side. In those final moments, some say he gave her the ring. Others claim she simply took it as a keepsake, something to remember him by. Either way, the ring now belonged to the woman who loved him most. She had no idea what wearing it would cost her, but the ring had other plans first. Plans that involved a young crooner and a gun that shouldn't have been able to fire. Russ Columbo, the crooner whose luck ran out. Russ Columbo was called the Romeo of radio, a velvet-voiced crooner poised to rival Bing Crosby himself. Then he borrowed Valentino's ring for good luck, and 10 days later, he was gone from a bullet wound so bizarre that investigators could barely explain it. Picture this. It's 1934, and radio is king. Every evening, families gather around their living room sets to hear the voices that fill their homes with music and magic. And one of those voices, smooth as silk and twice as romantic, belonged to Russ Columbo. He was only 26, but already he'd captured hearts from coast to coast. Women swooned over his crooning style, that intimate way he had of singing as though he were serenading each listener personally. He had a recording contract, film roles waiting, and a future that seemed absolutely limitless. Some were even saying he'd eclipse Crosby. That's how good he was. Now, Colombo admired Valentino tremendously. He'd been just a teenager when the Latin lover had passed, but the legend had never faded. When a friend, some say it was Pola Negri herself, offered to loan him Valentino's ring, Colombo saw it as a tribute, a way to connect with the star he'd idolized. He slipped it onto his finger and wore it proudly, telling friends it was for good luck. The ring felt strangely cold, just as it had on Valentino's hand. On September 2nd, 1934, Colombo visited his friend Lansing Brown at his home. They were close, comfortable with each other. Brown was an old friend from the photography world, someone Russ could relax with between the demands of his skyrocketing career. The two men were chatting in Brown's study when something impossible happened. But here's what the LAPD never released to the public, details that only emerged decades later when the case files were finally opened. Sitting on Brown's desk was an antique dueling pistol, one of a matched pair that Brown kept as decorative pieces. They'd been sitting there for years, ornamental relics from another era. According to the police report, the gun hadn't been loaded or fired in over 2 decades. Brown picked one up, perhaps gesturing with it as he told a story, perhaps just moving it aside. The pistol discharged. The blast in Brown's study was so loud that neighbors 3 houses away heard it. In the sudden silence that followed, the only sound was the ring rolling across the hardwood floor, a soft, metallic spinning that seemed to go on forever. The bullet struck Russ Colombo. He was gone almost instantly. Now, here's where it gets truly strange. The official story was that the pistol had been used as a paperweight and somehow, impossibly, spontaneously fired when Brown moved it. But that explanation satisfied almost no one. How does an antique dueling pistol, sitting dormant for years, suddenly discharge on its own? The LAPD report listed the cause as accidental discharge, but investigators noted several inconsistencies they couldn't explain. The gun's mechanism showed no signs of recent use. There was no clear trigger event. The questions multiplied. Was it truly an accident? Had it been something else entirely? The investigation went round and round, but no conclusive answers ever emerged. The whole thing remained shrouded in mystery, a tragedy that made no sense no matter how you looked at it. Perhaps the most heartbreaking detail came afterward. Russ Colombo's mother was elderly and frail, her health delicate. Those close to the family made a decision. They wouldn't tell her what had happened. Instead, they told her that Russ had gone on tour, that he was traveling abroad, that he'd write when he could. For 10 years, they maintained that fiction. 10 years his mother waited for letters that would never come, believed her. Son was somewhere out there, living his dream. When she finally drew her last breath in 1944, she still believed her Russ was alive and well. The ring, meanwhile, was removed from Colombo's hand and quietly disappeared from public view for a time. It was wiped clean, the metal still cold as ice. A career that should have lasted decades had ended in seconds. And waiting in the wings was the woman who'd loaned him that ring, about to discover that her own reckoning was just beginning. Pola Negri, the star whose career crumbled. Pola Negri collapsed at Rudolph Valentino's funeral with such dramatic grief that some whispered it was mere publicity. But when the Polish actress slipped Valentino's cursed ring onto her own finger, her skeptics would watch her career crumble into dust within months. Let's be clear about something. Pola Negri was a star. Not just any star, but one of the brightest lights in Hollywood's firmament. In the 1920s, she commanded the kind of salaries that made studio executives wince. She was exotic, tempestuous, utterly captivating on screen. And she and Valentino? Well, theirs was a love affair that had all of Hollywood talking. When Valentino's life ended in 1926, Negri's grief at his funeral became legendary. She arrived dressed entirely in black, veiled and trembling. When she saw his casket, she collapsed, had to be carried out. Some said it was the most genuine display of heartbreak they'd ever witnessed. Others, more cynical, suggested it was performance. But genuine or not, Pola claimed something that day that would change everything: Valentino's ring. Whether he'd given it to her in those final moments, or whether she'd taken it as a keepsake, We may never know for certain. What we do know is that she had it, and she cherished it as her last connection to the man she'd loved. Now here's where the story gets particularly interesting. After Colombo's impossible end in 1934, the ring found its way back to Pola. She'd loaned it to him, you see, perhaps thinking that sharing Valentino's memory would bring the young crooner luck. Instead, it had brought catastrophe. When the ring returned to her, Pola must have felt some tremor of unease. Two men now, both connected to this piece of jewelry, both gone far too soon. But she kept it anyway, wore it, refused to believe that something she'd treasured could truly be cursed. And here's what's remarkable. For a brief moment, it seemed like she might escape after all. In early 1929, she received an offer from a European studio. A major role, excellent money, a chance to reinvent herself abroad. Friends reported that Pola seemed lighter, more hopeful than she'd been in years. She was actually planning to leave Hollywood behind, to start fresh somewhere the ring's shadow hadn't reached. But then the talking pictures arrived, and everything changed. Almost immediately, her world began to fall apart. That heavy Polish accent that had seemed so alluring in silent films became a liability. Audiences couldn't understand her. The European offer evaporated. They wanted someone who could speak clearly for the new sound technology. Directors didn't want to cast her. The roles she'd once commanded, the passionate leading ladies, the dangerous seductresses, they started going to younger actresses who spoke perfect English. Film after film failed. Her once devoted public turned fickle. Box office receipts dwindled. And through it all, Pola wore the ring, even as a gnawing superstition began to take hold in her mind. Friends noticed her growing obsession with the idea that the ring was cursed. She'd touch it nervously, twist it on her finger, talk about Valentino and Colombo and the strange pattern of misfortune that seemed to follow the piece. Yet she couldn't bring herself to take it off. It was all she had left of Rudolph. By 1932, the truth was undeniable. Pola Negri, once the highest-paid actress in Hollywood, had become box office poison. The studios didn't want her anymore. The public had moved on. At last, defeated, she removed the ring and gave it away, hoping that distance might somehow break whatever hold it had over her life. But the damage was already done. That same year, she left Hollywood and returned to Europe, her career in ruins, her stardom extinguished. She'd survived the ring, barely. But the life she'd built in America was gone, as completely as if it had never existed. The ring, however, was far from finished, and waiting in the shadows was someone who'd watched it all happen. Someone who should have known better. 3 victims so far, each destroyed in a different way. Valentino bought it and was gone within 6 years. Colombo borrowed it and lasted 10 days. Pola wore it and watched her entire career collapse. And we're just getting started. Subscribe now, because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about coincidence. The ring's next victim was Valentino's own best friend, a man who knew the curse was real, but found that knowledge wasn't enough to save him. Jack Dunn, Valentino's best friend who couldn't resist. Jack Dunn had stood beside Rudolph Valentino through scandal and triumph, the kind of friend who knew every secret. When he inherited the cursed ring, he swore he'd never wear it. But curiosity, or perhaps fate, proved stronger than fear. You know, in Hollywood, true friendship is a rare and precious thing. The town runs on competition, on envy, on the constant jockeying for position. But every now and then, you find a bond that transcends all that. Something genuine, something real. That's what Valentino and Jack Dunn had. Dunn wasn't a star himself. He worked behind the scenes, connected to the film world, but not consumed by it. What he was, more than anything, was Rudolph's confidant. The person Valentino could talk to when the pressure of fame became too much. The one who'd been there through the difficult times, the scandals, the triumphs, all of it. When Valentino drew his final breath in 1926, Dunn was devastated. He'd lost more than a friend. He'd lost a brother, really. The kind of person you only meet once in a lifetime. Through Pola Negri's circle, Hollywood was a surprisingly small world in those days. The ring eventually made its way to Jack. Perhaps he felt, as Valentino's closest friend, that he had some claim to it. Perhaps it was offered to him as a remembrance. However it happened, by the mid-1930s, The ring was in his possession, and Jack Dunn knew exactly what that ring had done. He'd watched Valentino's health decline after purchasing it. He'd heard about poor Russ Columbo's impossible accident. He'd seen Pola's career collapse like a house of cards. This wasn't superstition or gossip. This was a pattern, clear as day, and Jack was smart enough to recognize it. So he locked the ring away, put it in a drawer, in a box, somewhere he wouldn't have to look at it, wouldn't have to think about it. Jack tried to throw it away, wrapped it in cloth, tossed it in a trash bin behind his building. 2 hours later, he found himself climbing down the fire escape at midnight, digging through refuse until he found it. He couldn't explain why. He just knew he had to get it back. After that, he locked it in a drawer and tried to forget it existed. For months, he resisted wearing it. He knew better. He absolutely knew better. But grief has a way of wearing you down, doesn't it? And loneliness? And that particular kind of heartache that comes from missing someone who can never come back. The ring sat in that drawer like a splinter in his mind. He'd wake up thinking about it, dream about Valentino wearing it, laughing, alive. One night, alone in his home, Jack opened the drawer. He took out the box. He looked at the ring, that distinctive tiger's eye stone catching the lamplight, and he thought about his friend, about Valentino's laugh, his charm, the way he'd made everyone around him feel a little more alive. Just for a moment, Jack thought. Just to feel close to him again. He slipped the ring onto his finger. The metal was cold, so cold it almost burned. Within weeks, Jack Dunn fell ill. The doctors couldn't quite determine what was wrong. It was one of those mysterious ailments that didn't fit any known diagnosis. His strength ebbed away, his vitality gone. The man who'd always been so robust simply began to fade, as if something were draining the life from him day by day. By 1937, it was clear he wasn't going to recover. As Jack lay dying, those who were with him reported something chilling. In his final moments, barely conscious, he whispered just 3 words. The ring knew. What did he mean? That the ring had sensed his moment of weakness? That it had been waiting, patient and malevolent, for him to give in? That it had called to him night after night until he couldn't resist anymore? We'll never know for certain. Jack Dunn had survived the lawless 20s and the Depression. He'd weathered scandals and heartbreak and everything Hollywood could throw at him. But one moment of weakness with Valentino's ring ended him. Love and friendship had made him vulnerable, and the ring had exploited it without mercy. The collector who tried to destroy the curse. By the early 1950s, Valentino's ring had acquired such a dark reputation that one collector purchased it with a single intention: to break the curse forever. His plan was simple: melt down the ring and scatter the remnants. He never got the chance. You have to understand, by this point in the story, the ring's legend had grown considerably. 4 people now: Valentino himself, Russ Columbo, Pola Negri's ruined career, and Jack Dunn, all connected by this one piece of jewelry. The pattern was simply too striking to ignore, even for the most rational minds. Enter our collector. He was a wealthy gentleman, fascinated by Hollywood memorabilia in the way that some people collect rare books or fine art. But this wasn't about adding a trophy to his collection. No, this man had done his research. He'd traced the ring's path through the years, documented the tragedies, spoken with people who'd known the victims, and he'd come to a singular conclusion. The curse had to be stopped. The solution, he believed, was destruction. If the ring no longer existed, the curse couldn't continue, could it? It made a certain kind of sense. He tracked the ring down through estate sales and Hollywood connections. And it wasn't easy, mind you. By the 50s, people were already wary of the thing. Some wouldn't even discuss it. But our collector was determined, and he had resources. Eventually, he acquired it, paying a premium price for what most would consider a cursed object. Now, he didn't just want to toss it in a furnace and be done with it. He consulted with experts, people who studied the occult, who understood rituals and symbolism. They advised him on the proper way to break a curse of this magnitude. There would be a ceremony, they said, specific conditions, a particular date when the planetary alignments would be most favorable. He scheduled everything meticulously, found a jeweler willing to melt it down, made arrangements for the metal to be scattered in different locations so it could never be reassembled. He even wrote down his intentions, documenting the entire process for posterity. The date was set, Everything was ready. The collector felt confident, even triumphant. He was going to be the one who ended this nightmare. 3 days before the scheduled ceremony, the collector suffered a massive heart attack. Just collapsed, right there in his study, the ring sitting in its case on his desk, mere feet away. The doctors were baffled. He'd been in perfect health, no warning signs, nothing to suggest his heart was anything but strong. He was gone that very night. The ring, sitting in its case, remained completely untouched. When his estate was settled, those going through his belongings found his notes about the planned destruction. They found the consultations with occult experts. They found evidence of a man who'd been absolutely convinced he could end the curse through sheer determination and careful planning. And they found the ring itself. The tiger's eye stone gleaming, as beautiful and mysterious as the day Valentino had purchased it. That's when people really started to wonder. Was this just a cursed ring? Or was it something more? Did it have some kind of awareness? Some ability to protect itself from those who would destroy it? 2 attempts now. 2 men who'd planned its destruction. Both stopped before they could complete the task. The ring had survived another attempt on its existence. Those who knew the story began to whisper a new, even more unsettling question. Was the ring cursed? Or was it alive, conscious, fighting for its own survival? And if you couldn't destroy it, could you even escape it by simply touching it once? A brash gambler was about to test that theory and lose everything. Joe Casino, the showman who gambled with fate. Casino Joe, nightclub owner, gambler, and Hollywood hanger-on, laughed at superstition. When someone dared him to wear the Valentino ring for a week, he accepted with a grin. 7 days later, his luck ran out permanently. Now, Joe Casino wasn't his real name, of course. That was just what everyone called him. He ran a nightclub on the edges of Hollywood, the kind of place where the lights stayed low and the drinks flowed freely. Movie people came there to unwind, to gamble a little, to pretend they were just regular folks for a few hours. And Joe? He loved every minute of it. He was brash, confident, the sort of fellow who'd bet on absolutely anything. Horses, cards, dice, which raindrop would slide down the window. First, it didn't matter. Joe lived for the thrill of the wager, and he didn't believe in curses, hexes, or any of that nonsense. As far as he was concerned, luck was something you made yourself. So when someone at a poker game in the early 1950s brought up Valentino's ring, told the whole story about the tragedies, the mysterious losses, the collector whose heart had stopped trying to destroy it, Joe just laughed. "That's Hollywood hokum," he said, dealing another hand. Coincidence dressed up as mystery. People die every day. This ring just happened to be nearby. "Prove it," someone challenged. "Wear the ring for a week, 7 full days. If you're still standing after that, we'll all admit you're right." The table went quiet. Everyone knew the stories by now. 5 confirmed victims, 2 failed destruction attempts. But Joe Casino. He grinned that cocky grin of his, leaned back in his chair and said, "You're on. Make it interesting. $500 says I'll be just fine." Within a day, he had the ring. How he got it, who loaned it to him, those details have been lost to time. What we do know is that he wore it proudly, showed it off to anyone who'd look, told them all about the bet and how he was going to prove once and for all that curses were bunk. The first 3 days brought minor incidents, stumbles, fender benders, small accidents. Joe laughed them all off. By midweek, things escalated. A bar fight, a near-fatal car accident, friends begging him to stop. But Joe's pride wouldn't let him quit. Day 7 arrived. That evening, Joe left his nightclub around midnight. Several patrons reported that he seemed nervous, kept touching the ring, twisting it on his finger. But he was still wearing it, still determined to see it through. He was driving home along a familiar route, a road he'd traveled 1,000 times. The night was clear, traffic light. Witnesses reported seeing his car veer suddenly, violently, off the road. There was no other vehicle involved, no obvious reason for the crash. The automobile struck a telephone pole with devastating force, the kind of impact that twists metal into unrecognizable shapes. When they found Joe Casino, he was gone, the life crushed out of him. The impact had been catastrophic. The car folded like an accordion. But the ring was still on his finger, completely undamaged. Not a scratch on it. The tiger's eye stone still gleaming, while everything else was twisted metal and shattered glass. Exactly 7 days after he'd put it on. Not 6, not 8, 7. As if the ring had been counting down with him, waiting for the moment his pride had committed him to reach. Joe Casino had gambled with cards, dice, and horses all his life. He'd won big and lost big and always come back for more. But betting against Valentino's curse was the one wager he couldn't survive. The ring had given him exactly what he'd asked for, 7 days to prove it wasn't cursed. And on the 7th day, it had collected. After his passing, the ring disappeared for a while, passing through hands unknown, until it surfaced again in the possession of a man who thought sophistication and modernity could protect him. A fashion designer who made a fatal mistake. 6 victims down, 5 more to go. We've seen it claim lives in impossible accidents, sudden illness, and now a perfectly timed crash. Leave a comment and tell me, do you believe in curses? Or is this all just a series of tragic coincidences? Because what happens next might change your mind. A fashion designer tried to turn the ring into art. The ring turned him into another victim. Del Campo, the fashion designer who photographed his fate, fashion designer James Del Campo, thought himself sophisticated and modern, far too worldly to believe in curses. He acquired the Valentino ring as a curiosity, even photographed it for a magazine spread. The camera captured the ring's beauty. It also captured something else. Something that 3 people on the photo shoot would later swear they saw in the images, though they couldn't quite explain what. Picture Hollywood in the 1940s. A world of elegance, of carefully constructed glamour. The stars didn't just appear beautiful on screen by accident. Behind every perfect silhouette, every stunning gown, every immaculately tailored suit, there was someone making it happen. Often, that someone was James Del Campo. Del Campo was one of those rare artists who understood that fashion wasn't just about clothing. It was about creating dreams. He dressed the biggest names in Hollywood, understood intuitively how to make a woman feel like a goddess or a man look like he'd stepped out of a fairy tale. His atelier was one of the most sought-after addresses in Los Angeles. To wear a Del Campo original was to announce that you had arrived. He was also, by all accounts, thoroughly modern in his thinking, scientific, rational, the sort of person who read philosophy and attended lectures on psychology. Superstition, to him, was the refuge of the ignorant. Curses? Please. This was the 20th century. So when the Valentino ring came onto the market again, passed along through various hands after Joe Casino's 7-day countdown to doom, Del Campo saw it as an opportunity. Not to wear, heavens no, but as a conversation piece, a bit of Hollywood lore to display in his studio. Clients would see it and ask about it, and he'd tell them the story with a knowing smile, showing how far above such nonsense he stood. Better yet, he had an idea. A fashion magazine had approached him about doing a spread showcasing jewelry through the decades. The Valentino ring would be perfect, the centerpiece, really. History, tragedy, glamour, all wrapped up in one object. He arranged the whole thing, dramatic lighting, elegant presentation, the ring photographed against black velvet, caught in moments of shadow and light that made the tiger's eye stone seem almost alive. The photo shoot took place on a Tuesday afternoon in Del Campo's studio. The photographer, a young woman named Sarah, set up her equipment while Del Campo arranged the ring on various backgrounds. Everything went smoothly, professional, perfect. The photographs turned out beautifully. Stunning, really. The ring seemed almost to glow in the pictures, the tiger's eye stone catching the light in mesmerizing ways. Del Campo was quite pleased with himself. He'd taken this object of supposed evil and transformed it into art. But here's where things got strange. Everyone who worked on that photo shoot, the photographer, the art director, the assistants, reported the same thing. Splitting headaches that started within hours and lasted for days. And Sarah, the photographer, swore that in her prints, the ring's shadow looked wrong, as if it had moved between when the shutter clicked and when the film developed. The spread ran in a major publication that summer. Del Campo's name was prominently featured. He'd never been prouder of a piece of work. By October, Del Campo was in the hospital, It started with fatigue. Nothing alarming at first. He'd been working long hours, burning the candle at both ends, as they say. But the exhaustion deepened, became something more profound than simple tiredness. Then came the pain, the tests, the increasingly worried faces of his doctors. The diagnosis, when it came, was devastating. Terminal illness, aggressive and merciless. The kind that gives you months, not years. The doctors couldn't explain how quickly it had progressed, how it had seemingly appeared from nowhere in a man who'd been in perfect health just weeks before. Del Campo's friends rallied around him, of course. But there was something else happening, too. People began looking at those published photographs differently. Several readers wrote to the magazine reporting that they'd felt strange looking at the spread. One woman claimed she'd torn the pages out and thrown them away because they gave her nightmares. Another said her cat had hissed at the magazine, refused to let it stay in the house. Sarah, the photographer, refused to ever work with cursed objects again, even for triple her usual rate. She'd had the ring in her viewfinder, composed shots around it, adjusted its position with her own hands. The headaches had persisted for weeks after the shoot. By the following spring, James Del Campo was gone. He'd been 43 years old, in perfect health before acquiring the ring, before turning it into art. The doctors had no explanation for how quickly the disease had consumed him, how completely it had destroyed a body that should have had decades left. The photographs of the ring remained, preserved in magazine archives. Beautiful, elegant, timeless. Del Campo, like all the others before him, became just another name in the curse's growing ledger. 7 people now. 7 different ways the ring had destroyed lives. And the pattern was truly undeniable. Possession led to decline led to destruction. Every single time, without fail. But here's a question that was starting to haunt those who knew the story. What if you didn't possess it? What if you didn't even wear it? What if you just touched it once, for a few brief seconds? Surely that wouldn't be enough. Surely casual contact couldn't possibly activate whatever malevolence lived in that piece of jewelry. An actor at a Hollywood party was about to discover just how wrong that assumption was. James Craig, the actor who only touched it once. Actor James Craig didn't buy the ring, didn't borrow it, didn't even wear it. He simply picked it up at a party, examined it for 30 seconds, then set it down. But even that brief contact, some believe, was enough to seal his fate. Not with a quick end like the others, but with something crueler. A long life, watching his dreams slowly wither and die. James Craig was what you might call a working actor, not a household name, but a solid, dependable presence on screen. In the 1940s and 50s, he appeared in dozens of films, usually in supporting roles. He had the looks, the talent, the dedication. Studio executives saw genuine potential in him. There was talk, serious talk, about building him up into something bigger. He was the kind of actor every studio needed, reliable, professional, someone you could count on to deliver a good performance without drama or fuss. His future seemed bright, if not dazzling. He was on the verge, people said. Just one good role, one lucky break, and James Craig would be a star. Then came that party. It was sometime in the late 1940s, one of those Hollywood gatherings where people from all corners of the industry mingled over cocktails and canapes. Someone, and nobody quite remembers who, had brought the Valentino ring to display. By this point, the ring had become something of a macabre curiosity. People wanted to see it, to get close to this object that had supposedly wreaked so much havoc. It sat on a table, under glass initially, like something in a museum. People crowded around, telling the stories, counting the victims. 7 people by then, if you included Del Campo, whose funeral had been just months before. The atmosphere was part fascination, part nervous laughter, the way people behave around things that frighten them, but that they don't quite believe in. James Craig had been drinking a bit. Nothing excessive, just enough to make him feel bold and jovial. When someone suggested taking the ring out of its case for a closer look, he was among the first to volunteer. He picked it up, turned it over in his palm, examined the tiger's eye stone in the lamplight. The metal felt cold, unnaturally so, even in the warmth of the crowded room. "Well, I don't feel cursed yet," he joked. and everyone laughed. Someone snapped a photograph. Craig grinning, the ring held up between his thumb and forefinger, utterly carefree. He held it for perhaps 30 seconds, maybe less. Then he set it down, wiped his hands on his trousers as if brushing off the touch, and moved on to refresh his drink. Now here's where Craig's story differs from all the others, and in its own way, this might be the cruelest curse of all. He didn't collapse the next week. He didn't fall gravely ill. He didn't meet with some terrible accident. What happened to James Craig was far more subtle and far more torturous. His career simply stopped advancing. Roles that seemed promised to him, signed contracts, verbal agreements, done deals, mysteriously went to other actors. Screen tests that should have led somewhere led nowhere. Directors who'd praised his work suddenly became unavailable when his agent called. It was as if an invisible wall had gone up between Craig and success, a barrier he could see through but never breach. Year after year, he remained exactly where he was. A supporting player, a Maui, character actor, someone whose face you recognized but whose name you might not remember. Despite his talent, despite his dedication, despite everything he had to offer, James Craig never became the star he was meant to be. And here's the haunting part. Craig himself became convinced that the ring was responsible. Friends reported that he grew obsessed with the idea that he'd been marked that night. He'd bring it up in conversations, always circling back to that party, that moment, those 30 seconds when he'd held Valentino's ring in his hand and laughed. The others got it quick. He told a friend once, late at night, drunk and melancholy. Valentine, Colombo, the rest, boom, gone. But me, I just touched it. So it's taking its time with me, killing me slow, killing my dreams instead of my body. Was he cursed by that brief contact? Or was his story simply the ordinary tragedy of an actor whose potential was never quite realized? In Hollywood, that happens every day. Curse or no, curse. Thousands of talented people arrive with stars in their eyes and leave with nothing but memories of what might have been. But the timing, the suddenness of his career's stall, the way every opportunity evaporated right after that night, it was enough to make people wonder. James Craig lived into his 70s, passing away of natural causes long after most of the other ring victims were gone. But his career had perished decades earlier. The night he touched Valentino's ring and laughed, while others were granted the mercy of a quick end, Craig was cursed to live a long life in the shadow of his own unrealized potential. Some say that's the cruelest curse of all. Not a quick end, but a long life, watching your potential slowly rot away, knowing exactly when and how it all went wrong, and being powerless to change it. After Craig's slow decline became known, Hollywood decided the ring was too dangerous to remain in circulation. What happened next would change everything, because if people couldn't safely touch it, possess it, or even photograph it, then the ring needed to be locked away where no one could reach it. But even imprisonment, it would turn out, couldn't fully contain whatever darkness lived within that piece of jewelry. The vault keeper's warning. After so many tragedies, a Los Angeles bank agreed to store Valentino's ring in a sealed vault where no one could touch it. The veteran vault keeper, a man who'd guarded millions without superstition, refused to handle it. "I've seen what it does," he said simply. "You have to understand. By the late 1950s, the ring's reputation had grown beyond Hollywood gossip into something approaching genuine dread. 8 people now, their lives either ended or destroyed by this small piece of jewelry. The pattern was impossible to dismiss as mere coincidence. Something had to be done. The solution, at least temporarily, was containment. If the ring couldn't be destroyed, and the collector's untimely passing had certainly suggested it couldn't, then perhaps it could at least be isolated, kept somewhere secure where curious hands couldn't reach it, where it couldn't continue adding to its terrible tally. A prominent Los Angeles bank agreed to take custody of it. They had vaults designed to protect the most valuable items imaginable: jewels worth fortunes, documents of historical significance, irreplaceable artifacts. Surely they could keep one cursed ring under control? The vault keeper assigned to oversee its storage was a gentleman named, well, his name has been lost to history, but let's call him what everyone called him: Mr. Morrison. He'd worked at that bank for over 30 years, guarded treasures beyond imagination, handled millions of dollars in bearer bonds without batting an eye. He was the soul of pragmatism, the kind of individual who believed in what he could see and touch and verify. When they first approached him about storing the ring, he listened to the stories with polite skepticism. Hollywood dramatics, he thought. Tragic coincidences given supernatural explanations because people prefer mystery to randomness. Then he spent a week in proximity to the thing. The incident started small. A colleague who'd walked past the storage area complained of sudden, splitting headaches, the kind that came on like a thunderclap and lasted for hours. Another reported feeling inexplicably nauseated whenever she came near that particular vault section, though she felt fine everywhere else in the building. The climate control system, which had functioned perfectly for years, began malfunctioning, but only in the area where the ring was kept. The temperature would plunge suddenly, creating cold spots that had no logical explanation. Mr. Morrison himself experienced something he couldn't quite explain. Every time he approached the ring's storage box, and remember, this was a man who'd handled countless valuable items without hesitation, he felt what he could only describe as a profound sense of wrongness. Not fear, exactly. More like his body was warning him at some primal level to stay away. The air felt thicker near that vault, harder to breathe. His pulse would quicken for no reason. One afternoon, a young bank employee, new and eager to prove himself, volunteered to perform a routine check on the vault contents. He opened the box containing the ring, looked at it for perhaps 5 seconds, just long enough to verify it was still there, then carefully closed everything back up. Professional. By the book. 2 weeks later, his appendix ruptured while he was driving home from work. He barely made it to the hospital in time, nearly bleeding out internally before the surgeons could operate. When he recovered, when people asked him what had happened, he refused to discuss it. But he also refused to go anywhere near that section of the vault ever again. Put in a transfer request, moved to a different branch entirely. After that incident, Mr. Morrison made a decision. He went to management and stated, clearly and firmly, that he would not personally handle the ring. Not for any amount of money. Not for any reason. They could reassign him. They could fire him if they wished. But he would not touch that object. "I've been in this business 32 years, he told his supervisor. "I've guarded items worth more than this entire building. I've never once refused an assignment. But I've also never encountered anything like this. I've seen what it does. I'm not touching it." The bank wisely listened. They implemented what can only be called an isolation protocol. The ring was kept separate from all other valuables, treated almost like radioactive material. No single person was permitted to access it alone. Always 2 employees, always with witnesses, always documented. Any researcher or collector who inquired about viewing it was politely but firmly refused. In 1982, a former bank employee named Margaret Torres gave an interview to a local newspaper. She'd worked at the bank in the early 1960s and had been present during some of the strange incidents surrounding the ring's storage. "People think it's superstition," she said. "But I was there. I saw grown men refuse to go near that vault. I felt it myself, this cold that had nothing to do with temperature, this feeling that something was watching you. We treated it like it was dangerous because it was dangerous. 8 people had already lost their lives or their careers to that thing. We weren't about to become number 9, 10, and 11. And Mr. Morrison? He continued his 30-year career at that bank without incident, as long as he stayed away from Valentino's ring. He retired in 1971, gave a small speech at his farewell party, accepted his watch and pension, and never spoke publicly about the ring again. Locked away in darkness, behind steel doors and combination locks, the ring waited. Even imprisoned, isolated from the world, it had claimed enough lives to earn its terrible legacy. The question that haunted everyone who knew the story was this: could even a bank vault contain whatever malevolence lived within that piece of jewelry? The answer, as a young journalist in the 1970s would discover, was no. Isolation couldn't stop the legend from spreading. And it couldn't protect skeptics from seeking it out, convinced they could be the one to prove it was all nonsense. If this story has given you chills, share it with someone who loves old Hollywood mysteries. We've seen the ring destroy 8 lives in 8 different ways. From impossible accidents to slow career deaths to attempted destroyers struck down before they could act. But we're not done yet. Because what happens next proves that even in the modern era, even with science and skepticism on your side, Valentino's curse was far from finished. The Modern Skeptic, a 1970s encounter. In 1972, a young journalist convinced himself the Valentino curse was Hollywood hokum. He tracked down the ring, photographed it, even held it for his article debunking supernatural nonsense. 6 months later, his editor was writing his obituary. You see, by the 1970s, the golden age of Hollywood felt like ancient history. Valentino had been gone nearly 50 years. The studio system that had created those legends had crumbled. A new generation had taken over, young people who'd grown up with television, who approached the world with scientific skepticism, who saw the old stories as quaint relics of a more superstitious time. Our journalist, we'll call him David, though some accounts give different names, was exactly that sort of fellow. Smart, ambitious, fresh out of journalism school with something to prove. He specialized in debunking myths, exposing the truth behind urban legends and Hollywood folklore. He'd already written well-received pieces on haunted movie sets and supposed celebrity ghosts, always approaching them with the same methodology. Research, interviews, evidence, rational explanations. When he heard about Valentino's cursed ring, he saw his next big assignment, a perfect subject. The pattern of tragedies was well documented, which meant he could trace it, examine it, and ultimately explain it away. Coincidence, he was certain. Tragic, yes, but coincidence nonetheless. People wanted to believe in curses because mystery was more compelling than randomness. Human brains were wired to see patterns even where none existed. David spent months building his case. Every death had a rational explanation, he was certain. Valentino's stomach problems, Columbo's mechanical accident, Pola's accent in the talkie era. All coincidence, all explainable. He was going to prove it once and for all. The so-called curse, David concluded, was nothing more than a series of unrelated tragedies connected by narrative and coincidence. He could explain it all. He would explain it all. The article would be called "The Curse That Wasn't: How Hollywood Turned Tragedy into Legend." The challenge was getting access to the ring itself. It had been locked away for years by then, its guardians understandably reluctant to let anyone near it. But David was persistent, professional, credentialed. He made his case. A serious, scholarly examination would help put the superstition to rest. Wouldn't that be better than allowing the myth to fester? Think of the families of the victims, still haunted by these stories. He could give them closure, proof that their loved ones had simply been unlucky, not cursed. Eventually, grudgingly, they agreed. He could photograph it under controlled conditions. Gloves would be worn. The session would be brief and supervised. No removal from the premises. David arrived with his camera equipment on a Tuesday morning, confident and professional. He photographed the ring, from every angle, made detailed notes about its appearance, its craftsmanship. The tiger's eye stone really was beautiful. He had to admit that. The metalwork was exquisite. He could see why Valentino had been drawn to it. At one point, adjusting the position for better lighting, his gloved hand slipped slightly. His bare finger touched the metal band, just for an instant, a second at most. The metal was cold, much colder than it should have been in the climate-controlled room. David laughed it off, made a joke about it to his supervisor. "Well, if I keel over next week, you'll know the curse is real," he said, grinning. The supervisor didn't smile back. The photographs turned out beautifully. Crisp, clear, professional. He had everything he needed for his article. The definitive debunking of Hollywood's most persistent curse legend. He thanked his contacts, packed up his equipment, and drove home, feeling triumphant. Within 3 weeks, David was in the hospital. What started as exhaustion, he'd been working long hours on the article, burning through his notes late into the night, became something more serious. Unexplained weight loss, persistent fever. The doctors ran tests, found irregularities they couldn't quite explain. His blood work showed anomalies that didn't match any known condition. Personal troubles mounted with alarming speed. His engagement ended abruptly, His fiancée walking out after a fight David couldn't even remember starting. His apartment flooded from a burst pipe, destroying months of research notes. Backups that should have been safe somehow got corrupted. His car was totaled in an accident he somehow walked away from, though the vehicle was destroyed so completely the insurance adjuster couldn't believe anyone had survived. Friends suggested, half joking, that maybe the curse was real after all. David dismissed them, even as his condition worsened. Coincidence? Bad luck? Stress? Nothing more. He kept working on the article between hospital visits, determined to finish it, to prove his point. But his health continued to deteriorate. The doctors were baffled. They tried different treatments, different diagnoses, nothing quite fit. It was as if his body was simply shutting down for no reason they could identify. 6 months after he'd touched the ring, 6 months almost to the day, David's heart stopped. He was 28 years old. The medical examiner couldn't determine a definitive cause. The official report listed it as sudden cardiac failure of unknown etiology. The article he'd been writing remained unfinished in his typewriter, 3/4 done. His editor, a hard-nosed newsman who'd worked in journalism for 30 years, read through David's notes and research. He looked at the timeline. He saw the pattern David had dismissed, and he decided not to publish any of it. Not a word. Some stories, he said, are better left untold. That kid thought he could prove it was all coincidence. Now he's another name on the list. I'm not giving this curse any more publicity than it already has. The reporter's unpublished manuscript remained in a filing cabinet until the newspaper closed in the early 2000s. By then, David's name had been largely forgotten, just another young journalist whose career was cut short. The ring's legend, meanwhile, only grew stronger, fed by whispers about the skeptic who'd tried to debunk it and ended up becoming victim number 9. After more than 40 years of destruction, one question remained. Where does such an object finally rest? Who guards it now? And most importantly, is anyone brave enough or foolish enough to believe they might be safe from whatever darkness it carries? Where the ring rests now, and who guards it today? Rudolph Valentino's ring exists in a state of limbo, neither destroyed nor displayed, neither forgotten nor famous. Its current location is known to only a handful of people, all of whom have signed agreements, never to reveal its whereabouts. This is the story of how Hollywood's most cursed object finally found peace, or something like it. The exact location, I'm afraid, must remain a mystery. But we can tell you this much. The ring is in safekeeping. After the journalist's untimely end in the 1970s, those responsible for its custody made a collective decision. This object, whatever it truly was, could not be allowed to claim any more victims. Some accounts suggest it rests in a private collection, owned by someone with deep pockets and deeper respect for its dark history. Others whisper that it's in a museum's storage facility, cataloged under an innocuous description that gives no hint of its notorious past. Still others believe it's been locked away in a safety deposit box, the key held by executors of an estate who've been instructed never to open it. Wherever it is, the guardians, and there are guardians, make no mistake, follow strict protocols. The ring is never displayed publicly. It's never loaned out for exhibitions or film productions, despite numerous requests over the years. Collectors have offered substantial sums to acquire it. Filmmakers have wanted to feature it in documentaries. Researchers have pleaded for access to study it. Every request has been declined, every single one. The current caretakers have seen the records. They know the names: Valentino, Colombo, Negri, Dunn, the collector and his nephew, Casino, Del Campo Craig, the vault employees who fell ill, the journalist. Some lists include others, people whose stories are less well documented, but whose misfortunes were attributed, rightly or wrongly, to contact with the ring. 10, 11, possibly 12 verified cases, possibly more. That's not a legacy anyone wants to continue. The fascinating thing is how seriously these precautions are taken, even now, decades into an age of science and reason. The people who guard this ring aren't superstitious by nature. They're professionals, pragmatists, individuals who deal in facts and documentation. And yet, They treat Valentino's ring with the kind of caution you'd reserve for genuinely dangerous materials. Because here's what they understand. Whether the curse is real or not almost doesn't matter anymore. The ring carries the weight of genuine tragedy. Real people were lost, real careers crumbled, real lives were destroyed. That weight, psychological, historical, perhaps something more, makes it dangerous regardless of whether you believe in supernatural forces. Modern requests to examine the ring are politely but firmly refused. One collector, quite wealthy and persistent, offered an amount that could fund a museum wing. The answer was still no. A horror filmmaker wanted to feature it in a documentary about Hollywood legends. No again. Even academic researchers with impeccable credentials have been turned away. The people who know where it is have made peace with the fact that this particular piece of Hollywood history may never be shared with the public. Some knowledge, they reason, some objects, are better left undisturbed. And perhaps they're right. But here's something the Guardians don't like to talk about. Something that's been kept very quiet. Last year, just last year, a museum curator was cataloging items in a private collection. The ring was among them, stored in a secure case. She followed every protocol, wore gloves, never touched it directly. Simply opened the case, photographed it for insurance purposes, made notes about its condition, then sealed everything back up. Professional. Careful. By the book. 3 weeks later, she was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder that doctors had never seen before. Her immune system was attacking her own body for no reason they could determine. She spent 6 months in treatment, nearly lost her life twice, racked up medical bills that bankrupted her. She survived, barely, but she'll never work with historical artifacts again. Her hands shake too badly now, and she has nightmares about a ring with a tiger's eye stone that watches, that waits, that knows. The ring? Still intact. Still in its case, still waiting, still, it seems, hungry. When the Guardians heard about this incident, they implemented even stricter protocols. Now the ring isn't just isolated, it's quarantined. No one is permitted to photograph it. No one opens the case. It simply sits, monitored remotely, locked away in darkness. And that's where it remains today. We've recounted 11 stories here. 11 lives touched by this ring, 11 cautionary tales about the price of curiosity, pride, love, or simple bad luck. Whether you believe in curses or coincidence, the pattern speaks for itself. Rudolph Valentino, Russ Colombo, Pola Negri, Jack Dunn, the collector and his nephew, Joe Casino, James Del Campo, James Craig, the vault employees, the journalist, the curator, 11 names, possibly more we don't know about, all connected by a single piece of jewelry purchased in a San Francisco shop over a century ago. The ring itself, that small circle of metal with its tiger's eye stone, has achieved a kind of immortality that Valentino himself might have envied. His films can still be watched, his image still admired. But the ring? The ring has become legend, myth, a campfire story that happens to be true. Whether it carries a genuine curse or simply the weight of tragedy and coincidence, one thing remains certain. Rudolph Valentino's final gift to the world wasn't his films. It was this dark legend that refuses to perish. Like the Latin lover himself, the ring has achieved a kind of immortality. But unlike Valentino, whose legacy brings joy to those who discover his work, the ring's immortality is built on sorrow, on loss, on the wreckage of lives cut short or dreams unfulfilled. And here's the final warning, the one the Guardians want you to hear. If you're ever offered a chance to see Valentino's ring, in a private collection, in a back room somewhere, in a vault you somehow gain access to, remember these 11 names. Remember Valentino, who bought it and was gone within 6 years. Remember Colombo, struck by an impossible bullet. Remember Pola, whose career crumbled. Remember Jack, who couldn't resist one moment of connection. Remember the collector, whose heart stopped before he could destroy it. Remember Casino, who gambled and lost. Remember Del Campo, who turned it into art and paid with his life. Remember Craig, cursed to watch his dreams slowly wither. Remember the vault employees who fell ill. Remember the journalist who tried to debunk it. Remember the curator who merely photographed it and nearly lost everything. Remember all 11. And then ask yourself, is your curiosity worth becoming name number 12? The ring is still out there, still waiting, still cold to the touch. And if history has taught us anything, it's that Valentino's curse is far from finished. Perhaps that's the cruelest curse of all. Not that the ring brings misfortune, but that it transforms tragedy into legend, ensuring that these sorrows will never be forgotten, that they'll be told and retold for as long as people gather to share stories about Hollywood's golden, glittering, and sometimes very dark past. The ring waits in darkness, and it will wait for as long as it takes. We've journeyed through 11 tragic stories, each one connected by a single piece of jewelry that refuses to release its hold on our imagination. From Rudolph Valentino's fateful purchase in 1920 to a museum curator's near-fatal encounter just last year, the pattern remains unbroken. Was it truly cursed? Or have we cursed it with our belief, turning tragedy into legend until the two became impossible to separate? The ring knows, and the ring isn't telling. If you've enjoyed this journey through one of Hollywood's darkest legends, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold stories from the Golden Age. Leave a comment telling us, do you believe in the curse of Valentino's ring? Or is it all just a series of impossible coincidences? Until next time, this is Golden Age Files, celebrating the glamour, the mystery, and the shadows of Hollywood's most legendary era. Thank you for watching.